Hello, everybody, and welcome to another round of Question and Perspective. I am the Reverend Dr. Caleb J. Lyons, he, him, and I am glad you're here. It's been a little while since I have done a Question and Perspective. I've been traveling this summer, but I am back and would like to do just 30 minutes or so of question and perspective. So in progressive Christianity, we often talk about the fact that there is no one right answer most of the time. Instead, what we have are perspectives. And so I will offer my perspectives. I'm streaming across platforms here on my personal and church pages on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And so if you have questions that you would like to hear a perspective on, go ahead and put those in the chat. And wherever you are watching from, I can see those. So go ahead and think about any questions that you might have and throw those in the chat. I'm going to start with one that I've got. What does it mean to follow Jesus in a world obsessed with power and profit? Thank you for writing that. That's a good question. And is our world obsessed with power and profit? Yeah, I mean, of course, yes, we are definitely living in a world that is hyper obsessed with power and control and lifting ourselves up at the expense of others. And so it is difficult, I think, to follow Jesus in a world where the values of Jesus are not the values of our society. And I think it's certainly true that perhaps right now we are further from the values and teachings of Jesus than we have been in a very long time. And so what does it mean to follow Jesus in a world like that? Well, I think it means that we have to be even more intentional about ensuring that we are practicing compassion and mercy and empathy and working for a more just society. One of the things that we find from the teachings of Jesus is that true peace only comes through the presence of justice. And whenever Jesus was going around in the Roman Empire, the way that the Roman Empire created peace was through conquest and through violence. The great Pax Romana is a time that was defined by peace only because the Romans required you to become Roman. It was peaceful if you were willing to become Roman, and if you weren't, then it wasn't peaceful. And so Jesus instead didn't talk about that kind of peace. He talked about peace that came through the presence of justice by ensuring that absolutely everyone had enough. And so what does it mean to follow Jesus in a world obsessed with power and profit? What it means is that we eschew that stuff. We call out people like the Trump administration, like Netanyahu, people who are obsessed with power and control and violence, and we say that this is incompatible with our faith. It's incompatible with the teachings of Jesus Christ. And so what we do is we practice compassion and kindness. So go ahead and throw questions that you would like in the comment section, and I will look at those and address some of those. I'll be on for a few minutes to give a question and perspective. So Diet Coke Man on TikTok has said, everyone who goes to his church, don't go there. He don't preach the gospel. Well, thank you, Diet Coke Man. I'm a Diet Coke fan myself. You know what's interesting to me about people who say that? I get this a lot on social media about being a wolf in sheep's clothing or not preaching the gospel. And here's my thing about that. A lot of times when I ask folks, then what is the gospel? A lot of times what people have to say is that it's about believing the exact right thing. And it's funny to me that the exact right thing always happens to be what that particular person believes, that particular person has the monopoly on the truth. And I don't know, Diet Coke Man. It seems to me that maybe one person living in one particular place at a particular time may not have all the answers in the universe. And so this is one of the problems with religion. Whenever people think that they know it all and that they somehow have the right answer and that everyone else is wrong, if you take that position, I got to tell you, you are taking a position that is harmful to people and is harmful to the gospel of Jesus Christ, who taught us about love, compassion, kindness, and care. So maybe, I don't know, take a, a pill of humility. I'm going to go to Instagram here for a comment. The Keach says, do you believe homosexuality is a sin? If not, why not? So, no, I don't think it is. And here's the thing. If you have watched the documentary 1946, The Mistranslation That Shifted Culture, it's a great documentary. I think you should check it out. And it talks about how the word homosexual even got into the Bible, and it was because of a mistranslation. So check that out. But no, most of the clobber passages that people use to bash the queer community over the head with is done in a way that is not authentic to the teachings of the Bible. It is inauthentic to the original intent of the text. And so I think it's sufficient to say that Jesus was concerned primarily with compassion, and he told us that our theology must pass the criterion of love. And if it does not pass the criterion of love, then it is inauthentic theology. That's enough. That said, most of the clobber passages easily fall apart with even a basic understanding of what the text meant. And so, if you go through and you look at the story of Sodom in Ezekiel, the Bible outright tells us that the sin of Sodom is a lack of hospitality and kindness and compassion. The Bible tells us that. It's not about what today we'd call being a part of the LGBTQ plus community. In Leviticus, scholars are unsure what the prohibition on what we might call today gay sex is even about. It may have to do with temple prostitution in Canaan. It may have to do with heirs, but regardless, it's not about consensual same-gender relationships in the 21st century. And Leviticus, by its own admission and definition, is not for 21st century American Christians. It is defined to Israel over 2,000 years ago. And so it by its own definition is not applicable to us. Christians should not be trying to apply Levitical laws to their lives. And Paul, whenever he's writing in the New Testament, is writing about an unequal power dynamic in the body of Christ, and particularly the practice of exploitation by older men of younger men in Roman society. That, by the way, is also what the mistranslation was about in 1946. And so if you are taking a queer theological lens to the Bible too, you can also look at this weird little text in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus is talking about eunuchs, and he talks about people who have been made eunuchs by others, basically men who've been castrated to protect women without sleeping with them. People who've been made eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, that is, people who have been a part of religious orders, and then people who have been eunuchs since birth. And that's a way of saying in ancient language, those who deviated from expected sexual orientation and gender identity. And so it's buried in ancient language, but if you look through the text, you can see that Jesus is affirming of the queer community. Back on Instagram, plant_with_peace_. Why does the right weaponize abortion if only God can judge? Well, that's a great question, plant_with_peace_. Why do they use it? Well, the political right in the 1970s had been rallying around segregation as a way to get people out to the polls. After the civil rights movement, it was no longer as acceptable to use racism to get people out to the polls. And the Supreme Court had made it illegal to discriminate in schools based on race. And so they needed a new topic. And they decided to try out a few. And the mastermind behind all this was a guy named Paul Weyrich. He didn't care about abortion. What he cared about was getting the rights agenda, the political agenda, passed. And so he decided to try a number of issues, including abortion. And he tried the topic of abortion in some swing elections that were very close. And he went out and he handed out pamphlets at church parking lots, and he saw that that actually abortion was something that could be used as a catalyst to get to the people to the polls. And so the Southern Baptist Convention had in the 1970s passed 4 different resolutions in favor of a person's right to choose. The Southern Baptist Convention, folks, the most conservative Christian denomination in the United States. But then after the marriage, the unholy marriage of the political right and the religious right, well, all of a sudden this became a religious issue. But Jerry Falwell, by his own admission, didn't preach about abortion for years after Roe v. Wade because he didn't see it as a political or as a religious issue. It was a political issue. But after this marriage, then all of a sudden it became a religious issue. So why does the right use abortion? Because it is a means and a motive to politics, to power, to money, and to control. So that's why we get that. I'm convinced that most of the political, religious, or the political right does not actually care about abortion. I think that most of the folks who have that as a part of their spirituality and are in leadership don't actually care about that. It's just that people have been manipulated into voting a certain way, into becoming single issue voters, and that was done very intentionally. So thank you for that question. Grace Demi _ says that they appreciate YouTube services watching from New York. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you're able to do that. And all of you, no matter where you are, if you're, no matter if you're in the United States or not, no matter which platform you watch on, no matter if you watch a whole service or clips or whatever, I'm glad you're a part of the community. And I see you as a part of the community. It's important to recognize that digital community is real community, that what we're doing right now is real community. And I thank you all for being here. And that there was a part 1 to that question or to that statement. It says, it doesn't feel like our efforts make any difference in this regime. I bet the Romans were much worse in Jesus's time, but how can we fend off hopelessness? So I think that that's something that so many of us are asking right now. A lot of the things that we have traditionally done, the ways that we have traditionally rallied around making a difference, haven't been effective because ultimately the Trump administration doesn't care. They are obsessed with staying in power and control, and so they are not responding to things that have traditionally worked. And so I think we continue to put pressure on people in power. We continue to take to the streets. We continue to write to our senators and our representatives. We continue to get on social media and to call out places of misinformation and disinformation and places where we see moral abuse happening. It is important to do that, because whenever we are able to do that, we continue to keep that pressure on. I think it's important for us to continue to have conversations amongst other people. I think it's the friends and family, even people who have differences from us. I think that's especially important to humanize people. I think it's important to continue to write, to make videos, to do all the things. But how do we fend off hopelessness? I think one of the ways that we fend off hopelessness is that we continue to do the things in our lives that give our lives meaning and purpose. Because one of the things that happens whenever we've got administrations like this is that we can get so hyper-focused on the things that are wrong in the world, the things that are destructive. And the fear, the real justified fear, I think, is it is something that can really hold on to us. And so what we do is we continue to do those things that give our lives meaning. If it's going to a religious service, do that. That if it's spending time with family and friends, do that. Don't let people take away your joy and your meaning. Go ahead and live your life the way you can, and let that empower you, embolden you to be at work in the world. Because the worst thing that can happen is if we give into hopelessness and we stop living our lives and we get into the state of depression and fear where we don't feel like we can really go forward anymore. Well, then we can no longer fight the fight that needs to be fought. And it is a fight that we have to fight. So I would say go ahead and find the places that you experience love and joy and happiness in your life, and let that inspire you to hope. Let's see. Sis4C says on Instagram, tithing was always preached as an expectation in the church. Are there other interpretations, or are we expected to give money to the church? Look, I think that there are ethical and unethical ways to talk about giving. That certainly prosperity gospel preachers are doing things that are antithetical, have a message that is antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. If you hear preachers say that God wants you to be rich, or that if you give a certain amount to the church or to a religious leader or anything like that, that you're going to be rewarded, that's bullshit. Don't listen to that, because those people are just trying to take your money, and that is antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. I also think that it's unethical if churches say that you have to do a particular thing, that you have to give a certain amount. And, I've even heard of churches who want to look at your tax return and all that and tell you how much to give. And all of that is BS. Don't listen to any of that. So I think that all of that is wrong. And I think that churches that tell you that you need to give a certain amount, also not helpful. That said, I think that it's also reasonable to recognize that churches are charities and nonprofit organizations. And I don't think there's anything wrong with nonprofits saying, hey, if you want to support the work of this nonprofit, we need your help. And that's just the way it is as nonprofits. So certainly, I think that it has to be talked about in an ethical way as being partners in doing work together. And certainly, I work for a nonprofit, both the church I serve, University Christian Church, and the Center for Progressive Christianity as well. We're nonprofits, and nonprofits are struggling, especially with this administration. That people and the economy, people are afraid to give because people are afraid of how the economy is going to be affected. Foundations right now are afraid to give too for larger nonprofits, and especially in regards to climate justice work. And so I think that that's just something to be aware of. Got a comment here, or a question here on TikTok that says, so, and this is Mark, the Lego person, says, so if God is all loving and wants everyone to go to heaven, why can't he just do that? So what you're talking about is a theological notion called universal salvation. And so universal salvation is the notion that that if God is all loving, then all people will go to heaven. No one will go to hell. So I think this is kind of a complex question. And so I'll break it down as best I can. One, I don't think the concept of hell is biblical, and they didn't believe in hell in Jesus's time period. In fact, the word that is translated as hell in our Christian English New Testaments is the word Gehenna in Greek. And Gehenna did not mean hell. It did not mean a place of eternal torment and fire and brimstone. That's not what it was. Gehenna was a literal place outside the city walls of Jerusalem where they either burned trash or where there had been pagan child sacrifice by burning. So either way, it was a place associated with fire, and it was thought to be like the literal worst place on earth. And so whenever Jesus was talking about Gehenna, he was talking about a place of separation between God, but he was using an example that people would actually understand because they knew what it literally was. So the concept of hell is not biblical. And so in that case, like once you get rid of hell, then whatever you're talking about may be eternal salvation. But look, or universal salvation. But look, I don't tend to get too worried about this because ultimately we have no idea what happens to us after we die. And anyone who tells you that they know what happens to us after we die is someone that you should perhaps not trust, because nobody knows that. You can have an opinion about that. You can even read the text and say, hey, I think the text says this, but none of us know that for sure. And so I tend not to spend too much time thinking about what that is like. Instead, trusting in the great divine mystery that somehow, when I am united in this with the universe, the divine, in some way, that's in God's hands. We are not in control of any of that. And so instead, I would say it's better to focus on creating a heaven on earth. And that's primarily what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about the basileia of God, the reign of God, the kingdom of heaven, creating that on earth through our actions. And I think that's what we're called to do. So why doesn't God just do that? Well, who knows what God does after we die? We don't. We don't have any idea. And so instead, all we can do is live the best life we can and make this world the best place we can. So I'll jump to YouTube now. Karna Bosman says, I have a commitment, but she appreciates it. So thank you. I appreciate that, Karna, and I'm glad you were able to join for a little while. Thanks to all of you for joining. If you have questions, go ahead and throw those in the comment section, and I will address some of those as I see it. Another one that I am seeing here coming on Facebook is the Bible still relevant in 2025? And if so, how? This is a great question, and I am going to do this for about 7 more minutes, and I'm going to have to get off. So if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in right now. So yeah, I think the Bible is still relevant in 2025 with caveats, right? The Bible is still relevant because the Bible is a source of knowledge about God. But we have to take the Bible in its context. And this has always been true about the biblical text, that the Bible was written not in one time, but like one person. It's not like God handed down the Bible. The Bible isn't the inerrant word of God, and it doesn't claim to be. That's just something people made up and said about the Bible. The Bible doesn't say that about itself even. It was written by different people in different times with different concerns. And so the way I look at the Bible is, that the Bible is a collection of people's experiences of God, people's understanding of God in a particular place with their own cultural biases. And so if we recognize that the Bible is that, then yes, of course, it is a tool, an insight into God, in which we can see how people understood God. And that's why we get so many different versions of God in the Bible. It is different people's understandings of God. Why God sometimes seems loving, sometimes seems vengeful, all of that. It's because different people have their own experiences, and we're reading that into God. And so if we take the time to recognize who was writing a particular thing and why, well, gee, that gives us all kinds of insight into God. But if we don't do that and we expect the Bible to be like a question and answer guide, well, that's not going to be real helpful. So I think, look, we are living in the 21st century. And since we are living in the 21st century, what that means is that we have the knowledge to recognize different literature styles and we can take that and we can apply that to the biblical text and have more deeper respect for the Bible, because I actually think it is deeper respect to actually look at the Bible in the way it was meant to be read and to try and authentically read it in that way. That's respectful. That's not disrespectful, despite what fundamentalists say. And so if we do that, then yeah, it's relevant. So this is on TikTok. MG Grant says, is there a verse you struggle with? Well, I think certainly there are verses in the text that are problematic. And I think that those texts need to be read in the way that I was just describing. And so, like, for instance, in one of the Psalms, we get the psalmist saying, I hope the heads of children are bashed against rocks, right? Well, that was written in the Babylonian exile, whenever Jerusalem had been destroyed and leaders had been taken out of Judea, and there was real animosity against the Babylonians because they were killing people. And so that verse, taken out of context, is horrible. I mean, it might even seem like God is okay with people killing children. That's problematic. But if you understand that that morally reprehensible verse comes out of a place of deep suffering after violence and war, then you know what? That is something that we can understand at least a little bit more about where where the people are coming from. Another thing that I would say used to struggle with a lot was Revelation. And the book of Revelation, there was an intentional choice made to put that in right in the 4th century when they were deciding what was going to be in the biblical canon, because remember, that was done by humans. Human beings wrote the text and then decided what was going to be in the biblical canon. And they made the decision to put the book of Revelation in. And I used to get really upset about that because I thought, well, you know what? They could have made a different choice. And there has been all kinds of bad theology that has come from the book of Revelation. And I wish they hadn't put that in. But then the more time I spent with it, the more I recognized, hey, this actually isn't about Jesus coming riding in on the clouds, or at least it's not exclusively about that. But what this verse is about, and beneath all this weird imagery, is about a person who was living under the persecution of the Roman Empire, who had been exiled from Rome and was on the island of Patmos, and he saw all of his fellow Christians being killed. And because of that, he was writing against the Roman Empire. And he had a little more freedom because he was on the island of Patmos, but not a lot more freedom. And so he had to be very careful about how he wrote about the Roman Empire. And so he wrote using coded language, talking about Rome as Babylon or as a 7-headed red dragon. And so whenever I understood that, it helped me to understand more about that text and why it was relevant. Hey, I would love to keep going, but it is time for me to get off. I'll try to do this a little bit more often. You can always feel free to send me a direct message too with questions. I can't always answer those. I get a lot of those, so I can't answer all of those. So please don't be offended if I don't respond. But if you are a subscriber, I do try to get to yours. And so if you want to subscribe, that helps make sure I get to your question. But I will try and answer some of those. And I'll try and do more of these lives every once in a while. So thanks again for joining.